What up, y'all? So from the title, you can tell that this video is gonna be about Abraham Lincoln and how he is a black man. I'm doing a series called "What If." I'm gonna do another video saying, "What if I told you that Michelle Obama wasn't the first black lady at the White House?" And I'm also gonna do another video. It's gonna be called "What If I Told You That Blacks Are Aboriginal to Americas and we wasn't brought over on slave ships?" I'm gonna do a couple more, all good shit. So stay tuned. It's important to know our history, man, as a people. It's got nothing to do about black or white, this or that. It's important to know. I mean, go back to the Egyptian days and with the pyramids. I mean, it's sad to say that even today, with all the technology we got and everything, the machines we got, that we still couldn't duplicate those pyramids, what they made with their bare hands thousands and thousands of years ago. So I mean, that tells you. I mean, and even with those pyramids and everything that they made back in those days, it was all built with astronomy. They're all aligned with the planets. They're all aligned with the stars. Everything they did. So that goes to show. So where would they be today as a people? Thousands of years later, I mean, with the technology we have now, I mean, they'll be on different planets or close to it. I mean, they'll be far more advanced than we are today because we're all divided and we're worrying about the wrong shit. So that's why this is important, yo. Stay tuned, man, and check this video out. Leave a like, subscribe, unsubscribe, leave a bad comment. I don't really care. You don't gotta believe me. What I really want you to do is do your own research so you can figure it out by yourself. That's what I do. All right, let's get into it. Bing, bang, bing, boom.
Let's move on to a big one. Abraham Lincoln. Yes, I said Abraham Lincoln. I don't think I have to introduce this man because if you were educated in the United States, you were taught just about everything about him, except for the fact that he had a self-prescribed dark complexion. Now, isn't it funny that his complexion never gets any attention? Okay, so I'm going to give you the bare minimum on Mr. Lincoln, and then I'll move on to the evidence I have for him. All right, so Abraham Lincoln was born February 12, 1809, and he died April 15, 1865. He was an American statesman and lawyer who served as the 16th President of the United States from 1861 to 1865. Lincoln led the nation through its greatest moral, constitutional, and political crisis, the American Civil War. He succeeded in preserving the Union, abolishing slavery, bolstering the federal government, and modernizing the U.S. economy. Lincoln was born into poverty in a log cabin and was raised on the frontier primarily in Indiana. He was self-educated and became a lawyer, Whig Party leader, Illinois state legislator, and U.S. congressman for Illinois. In 1849, he returned to his law practice, but became very vexed by the opening of additional lands to slavery as a result of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He re-entered politics in 1854, becoming a leader in the new Republican Party, and he reached a national audience in the 1858 debates against Stephen Douglas. Lincoln ran for president in 1860, sweeping the North in victory. Pro-slavery elements in the South equated his success with the North's rejection of their right to practice slavery, and the Southern states began seceding from the Union. To secure its independence, the new Confederate states fired on Fort Sumter, a U.S. fort in the South, and Lincoln called upon forces to suppress the rebellion and restore the Union. All right, so that whole description was from Wikipedia.com. All right, so that was just a little bit about our 16th President of the United States. Let's look at some of the evidence that shows he was a black man. All right, so from the U.S. National Park Service website, we can read that Lincoln wrote 3 autobiographies. In his second autobiography, dated December 20th, 1859, he described himself saying, quote, "If any personal description of me is thought desirable, it may be said, I am in height 6 feet 4 inches, nearly, lean in flesh, weighing on average 180 pounds, dark complexion, with coarse black hair and gray eyes. No other marks or brands recollected." All right, so the giveaways in his own description are dark complexion and coarse black hair. Now remember, as I explained and showed you via the 1895 South Carolina Convention discussions, Abraham Lincoln, having the appearance of a black man, was considered white because he could trace his lineage back to Europe. Now again, this is my theory, but that is why I'm explaining to you how I came to this conclusion. Okay, so my next source is from the U.S. Congressional Record, dated February 12, 1927, located on pages 3610 and 3611. These pages contain the same Lincoln autobiographical quote from Lincoln's own book, as you can see on the screen, where he states that he has a dark complexion. I'm showing you this reference because I want you to realize that everyone in Congress knew that he had a dark complexion, and no one disputed it. In fact, I'm going to go further. There were quite a few congressional members that had dark complexions. However, as I mentioned, the term white man or male was a status. So someone referring to this statesman today as a white man and not knowing this information that I shared with you today would jump to the wrong conclusion. Okay, so on to my next piece of evidence, and this is from history.net, and it's titled Lincoln the Homely, written by Harold Holzer. Holzer has a quote on page 7 that states, Nathaniel Hawthorne firsthand in 1862, quote, his hair was black, still unmixed with gray, stiff, somewhat bushy, and had apparently been acquainted with neither brush nor comb. His complexion is dark and shallow, betokening, I fear, an insalubrious atmosphere around the White House. He has thick black eyebrows and an impending brow. His nose is large, and the lines about his mouth are strongly defined. Just as a side note, I'm sure you're wondering what insalubrious means, and I did, so I looked it up, and according to Google's dictionary online, it means like unpleasant or unsavory. So I guess they're saying that the atmosphere around the White House at that time was unpleasant. Okay, so going back to the description I just read from Nathaniel Hawthorne, who was actually an eyewitness, stating that Lincoln had a dark and shallow complexion. And shallow, according to Webster's 1828 dictionary, means having a yellowish color, of a pale, sickly color, tinged with a dark yellow, as in a shallow skin. Hawthorne also mentions that Lincoln's hair is stiff and somewhat bushy, along with a large nose. All right, so then Holzer also writes that journalists vented endlessly about whether he was, in fact, too ugly to serve as president, castigating him as a lank-sided Yankee of the unloveliest and of the dirtiest complexion. The Charleston Mercury assailed him as a horrid-looking wretch, sooty and scoundrelly in aspect, a cross between the nutmeg dealer, the horse swapper, and the nightman, a creature fit evidently for petty treasons, small stratagems, and all sorts of spoils. Holzer further writes, it is fair to say that no one has ever before or since looked quite like Abraham Lincoln, certainly not his own children, who resemble their mother's family, not their father's. We have no pictures of Lincoln's own mother, who is said to be large-boned, tough-skinned like her son, but who died long before photography became commonplace. The future president's father supposedly sat for a lone photograph late in his life, but historians remain uncertain that it really shows Thomas Lincoln. It was as if the face sprang uniquely from the Kentucky soil, from the Indiana prairie, and from what Nathaniel Hawthorne called the village experience. You know, in my opinion, it's interesting that there are no paintings or etchings of the president's own mother. Or are they just not being shown to us? If Abraham Lincoln resembled his mother, then I'm assuming she also had a dark complexion and maybe some typical black facial features. Also, I'm not sure what Hawthorne meant by the village experience. All right, so another piece of evidence comes from a book called A Self-Made Man, The Political Life of Abraham Lincoln, 1809 to 1849, by Sidney Blumenthal. In the book, the author reveals that Lincoln admitted that he had been an indentured servant, a slave, rented out by his father to neighbors in rural Indiana. The author has a quote from Herndon that states, if he was angry with his father, he also knew that his father had been reduced to a dirt farmer and compelled to flee Kentucky to escape from slavery. Slave states are places for poor white people to remove from, not to remove to, Lincoln said in 1854 in his opposition to Douglas's Nebraska Act. I want you to again remember that just because he considered himself a white man, that is not what his description revealed. This book also mentions Lincoln's self-prescribed description of himself, although this author points out that at the end of Lincoln's description, he uses the words, "no other marks or brands recollected." This is the same terminology used by slave masters that had newspaper ads looking for their slaves. In my opinion, Lincoln was acknowledging his former status as a fugitive and his understanding of the evils of slavery. All right, so my next piece of evidence regarding President Lincoln is from the book Life of Lincoln, written by Clifton M. Nichols, published in 1896, and we're going to page 12 and 13. As you can see at the bottom of page 12, the author is writing about Thomas Lincoln, Abraham's father. It goes on to read, "A most remarkable and almost inexplicable fact is that to Thomas Lincoln was reserved the honor of an illustrious paternity. Thomas was about 5 feet 10 inches in height, weighed about 200 pounds, had dark brown eyes, dark skin, and black hair." Okay, so no ambiguous terms there. The author directly writes that Thomas Lincoln had dark skin. Obviously, this makes sense because Abe had dark skin, and naturally, you obtain your complexion from one or both of your parents. Okay, so my last piece of evidence for President Lincoln is from the book called The Lincoln Encyclopedia, the spoken and written words of Abraham Lincoln. All right, I'm going to reiterate, these are Abraham Lincoln's own words, and they were compiled and edited by Archer H. Shaw, with introduction by David C. Mearns, Assistant Librarian, Library of Congress, 1950. And we're going to go to page 190, and it says, "Lincoln, Abraham, personal description of." And the quote says, "Perhaps you have forgotten me. Don't you remember a long black fellow who rode on horseback with you from Tremont to Springfield nearly 10 years ago, swimming our horses over the Mackinac on the trip? Well, I am the same old fellow yet. To Joseph Hewitt, February 13th, 1848. All right, so you can see in his own quote, he calls himself a long black fellow who rode on horseback. Okay, you don't have to be a rocket scientist, okay? A long black fellow? Hello, that's screaming black guy, at least where I'm from. I'm going to give you a for instance here. Pretend someone just flags down the police and says, "Hey, someone just stole something from me." And the police say, "Well, what did he look like?" "Well, he looked like a long black fellow. He was riding on horseback." Guess what, folks? They're not going to be looking for a white guy. All right, so unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to share all the prime sources of evidence I have for Abraham Lincoln because I wouldn't be able to get to anyone else. However, I do want to give you a link to an outstanding researcher named Karamiu Awa. He has an extremely informative YouTube channel. I love his research because he backs everything up with sources, so you can check them out for yourself. Anyway.
You the chap with the Lincoln letter.
The Lincoln what?
The letter from Abraham Lincoln.
President Abraham Lincoln?
Yes. Weren't you pen pal?
With the president.
I'm sorry, I heard that somebody in your party had a letter from Abraham Lincoln. I assumed it was you.
Not him. Black fella in the stable.
The nigger? In the stable has a letter from Abraham Lincoln?
Yeah.
The nigger in the stable has a letter from Abraham Lincoln.